This is one of Deltarune's many mysteries, a hole containing the secret boss items from your past adventures. But why is it here? And what does it mean for Deltarune's future? To find out, follow me into the depths of Deltarune's biggest plot hole. So let's start off with the basics. What exactly is this hole, and what does it do? Well, for people that don't know, in the far west of Castletown, there is a hole that does absolutely nothing if you play the game normally. However, in the case that you play, say as an example, Chapter 2, without having first played Chapter 1, as in, you start playing Chapter 2 without Chapter 1 save data, it's going to be very confusing. I'm going to be saying Chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll try to keep it simple. In the video game Deltarune, you can actually play any of these 7 chapters in any order that you please. Of course, once you finish one chapter, it goes into the next one. It takes your completion data from the first chapter that you played, going into the next chapter, taking any information along with it. However, if you started one of these chapters without a prior chapter's completion data, or a fresh save, this hole will have a very different purpose. It will give you the secret boss items and shadow crystals of past bosses that you have defeated at some time. What I mean is that if you ever did defeat Jevil, defeat Spamton Neo, defeat the Roaring Knight, at all, across various save files, timelines, alternate universes, whatever, of all things the video game Deltarune keeps track of throughout anything that you do, it's defeating the secret bosses specifically that transfers between files. That being said, if you did play Chapter 1 and then went into Chapter 2 and you didn't defeat Jevil, the plot hole will not have his items. It's very much if you start later on in the chapters, say as an example, Chapter 4, you go to the hole, interact with it, and you'll get all these secret boss items. And a quick side tangent. For Jevil and Spamton's items, you only get whichever one that you fought against them first obtaining. You will only get the Black Shard and not the Shadow Mantle. There isn't any case where you get the Shadow Mantle, but you will 100% get the Black Shard. Presumably, in Chapter 5, when we interact with this hole again, we can get Chapter 4 Secret Boss's item, that being Garrison's Justice Axe. Tangent over. So from what I can tell, this plot hole, at the very least, is supposed to be a convenience feature for people so they don't have to replay every single chapter whenever something like Chapter 7 finally comes out. And some plot-related thing comes up where they need to go back and get all the shadow crystals. Nope, they can just interact with the plot hole. So for people that feel like really wanting to replay all of Deltarune just for the shadow bosses. Actually, why don't we call them shadow bosses? Like, okay, they're secret bosses, but they're more like, whatever. So if you start in a game in Chapter 7, that way you don't have to go replay every single chapter so you can get all the shadow crystals and then go into Chapter 7. It's a convenience feature. There's a lot of convenience features in this game that just so conveniently helps you, but also might have some lore relevance because they're diegetic. That's another tangent I don't want to get into at the moment. We're focusing on the plot hole and what it does. So, Sham, the only character that acknowledges that the hole exists, indirectly at least. He does have something of a tutorial dialogue about how it works. At the end of Chapter 2, if you have Spamton Neo's Shadow Crystal, but you don't have Jevil's Crystal.
What is that? It appears you have a Shadow Crystal. Unfortunately, I believe that you are missing one from your previous adventure. But, are you sure? Are you sure you didn't defeat that clown? Perhaps you just haven't remembered that you had yet. That's right. As long as you ever defeated that enemy in the past, then perhaps, even now, that crystal might turn up somewhere close, perhaps.
It's at this moment that if you go back to the hole, you will find Jevil's crystal and item within. In this example, it's the Devil's Knife, but depending on what was the first item you ever got from Jevil, it would be the Devil's Knife or tail. In this case, it's the knife. Afterwards, you can go back to Sham, and he's got this to say.
Ah, another shadow crystal. You found it. You can't see it, so perhaps you didn't notice. Didn't you defeat him? Didn't you defeat Jevil? Here, I'll take that crystal now. You have collected 2 of them. Huzzah!
Now, my interpretation of this is that Sham, in some form or fashion, knows about the hole and knows its existence, but just kind of plays around him knowing it or not. But effectively, this dialogue acts as a tutorial for how that feature actually works, where if you defeated one of the secret bosses in the past, you can go into newer chapters without having to replay the old ones so you can get their shadow crystals and items, which is pretty nice. So that's some of the general information that we can glean from what the plot hole is and what it does and perhaps what its intended use is for. Now for a couple lore implications. This is going to most likely be speculation, theory crafting you could say, me trying to interpret something that is or isn't there. So the next section's for a bit of fun, but I think it'll be quite interesting. So, now, what could this hole actually mean for Deltarune? Well, I have 2 major points that I want to cover, both will take several minutes to discuss. So, we'll begin with the first one, and that's that nobody acknowledges this hole. Susie and Ralsei don't seem to really care that you just reached into a hole and pulled out a giant knife or a tail or some glasses or a scarf, or the black knife from the night. Susie and Ralsei just don't seem to mind. You just have it now, whatever. It could be, though, and Sham mentions this in some of the dialogue options that he has if you interacted with this hole to get the items, that he words things as if you had always had defeated the secret boss, like, oh yes, I remember you did that. So perhaps if you played in future chapters without having played in prior chapters in a specific save file, interacting with this plot hole will retroactively make it so that you did fight those bosses. But if that was true, we would have evidence that we did fight those bosses, besides the fact that we had their items. However, to my knowledge, there is no case where whenever you have one of the 2 secret items, does anyone even acknowledge it. The only time there's ever been recognition that we fought against Jevil is Sham mentioning it in chapter 1 and also having extra dialogue. But I don't want to get into that too much. It's a little iffy if specific text has specific I'm overcomplicating this. The main point is, Sham is the only character in the entire game that acknowledges this hole at all. Neither Susie or Ralsei pay any attention to it, they don't comment on it or anything. And they've always seemed to comment on stuff before, right? Well, there have actually been some times where these 2, even though they're along for our journeys, there's a couple times they don't comment on some things that you do. And that's the times whenever Chris just gets transported away to somewhere entirely different. And I'm talking about the egg rooms as well as the 1225 secret room. Every single time that we take Chris to go get one of these eggs, time and space just seem to fail at around these points. In chapter 1, you go in between these rooms, eventually you find the tree room, and you get the egg, you come back out, and you're in an entirely different room than where you started. Susie Ralsei don't mention it whatsoever. Chapter 2, go into the back alley, same deal, in between room, go back and forth. If you have Noelle there, Noelle doesn't mention that Chris just vanishes. If you go there with Susie or Ralsei, they both also don't mention that Chris just vanished out of thin air and now has an egg. Chapter 3 is even stranger because Chris gets transported away by a zapper into a part of an elaborate scheme in order to get to the Chapter 3 secret egg room. And after using the ticket to flee a specific fight, Chris gets transported to Man's country, interacts with the man, gets the egg. Whether 11 days or 11 years, Deltarune will be waiting, blah blah blah. Upon return, you're back in the green room, and Chris and Ralsei don't seem to question why they're now here. And in Chapter 4, you have the choice of following Susie in order to see what prophecy she'll react to next, or veer off to the right and find yourself in a cathedral full of tons and tons of windows. One of these various windows houses the egg room, kind of. It goes to a library first, but then there's a hallway in that area that if you go back between enough, you'll eventually end up in a hospital room where Chris performs some drawings, and then a man gives Chris an egg. And upon return, you find Susie on her way to go get one of these prophecies, not even acknowledging that Chris took a detour. But the most concerning of all is the 1225 secret Easter egg hidden within Chapter 3 if you interact with this gumball machine and put in exactly 1,225 points. Doing so freezes the game. Susie and Rousey disappear, and now you can enter into the gumball machine and find yourself in wherever the hell this is. Some kind of pocket dimension or subspace. It's made up of tons of catwalks and platforms where nothing has any collision and you're more just walking on a flat plane. Eventually, after searching enough, you can find a small blue gumball machine that inside has some kind of black triangle that's described as made of black liquor. Though strangely enough, when you look down at your hand to observe more closely what you found, you can't find your hand. It's not there. And then, as if waking up from a dream, you appear back in the gumball room, without the gumball machine. Chris and Rousey both don't acknowledge that Chris left, or that the gumball machine is even gone. So, wrapping back to the plot hole for a moment, it's strange that there is even a connection to the secret egg rooms as well as the 1225 room, specifically because Susie and Rousey don't comment on this. Though with the special exception of Sham, who even brings up that it's a thing in the first place and at least acknowledges that you didn't and now do have these shadow crystals. So, the second point that I want to make are the direct connections to shadow crystals that the plot hole has. Because there's already Sham who has a connection to the shadow crystals, and is also the only one to directly refer to the plot hole. And it also seems to be its main purpose is to give you shadow crystals in such a way that you don't have to replay the entire game the later you are into the chapters. So what exactly does that entail? Well, I'd like to bring up the information on the unused item, the Pure Crystal. And, well, I say it's unused, it's more like it's unobtainable. It is an item that is in the code of the game, but we only know about it outside of just the code because of one of Malleus's crafting options requiring the Thorn Ring and the Pure Crystal, of which gets combined into the Twisted Sword. But how would we exactly get the Pure Crystal? Well, there's a theory going around that perhaps once we collect all the shadow crystals that we need, we give them to Sham, and he gives us the Pure Crystal in return, crafting them into said item. Which, interestingly, is supported by a little bit of dialogue that can unfortunately be found in the code. A crystal purified by the cat. Of course, I'm referring to Sham in this instance, where he is most likely the only character in the entire game that is actually a cat. Oh yeah, the tasks and manage. Okay, well, we'll just go off of the assumption, emphasis on the assumption part, that once we collect all 5 shadow crystals, or actually, are there only 5 shadow crystals? Would we actually get many more? Won't know until future chat. Anyways, Sham says once we get 5, he'll be able to stitch something together that he thinks we'll find pretty cool. And the only item in the game that is also referred to as a crystal is the Pure Crystal. So, assumption, 5 shadow crystals, 1 pure crystal. Assumption. Chapter 5 finally rolls around, and we get a 5th crystal. Now here's where I'm going to speculate quite a bit. Because if we do get the Pure Crystal at the end of Chapter 5, in that we're able to go to Castletown, talk to Sham after getting the crystal, get the Pure Crystal, and if we somehow found ourselves access to the Thorn Ring, we'll be able to make the Twisted Sword, and then, hopefully, be able to see what it's able to do. However, we don't know how Chapter 5 is actually going to be laid out, because for all we know, by the end of Chapter 5 is the only time we'll ever be able to go to Castletown and talk to Sham and get the Pure Crystal and create the Twisted Sword, only for us to never really be able to use it, and then the chapter ends and we're going to have to wait until Chapter 6 in order to figure out what it does. Which, that's going to be really frustrating. I mean, we might be able to go into, like, a test battle and then, like, see the damage, but it'd be interesting to see if it did literally anything else. And I guess while I'm talking so much about the Pure Crystal Twisted Sword, let's just quickly discuss the Thorn Ring really quick. So, if you don't know, in Chapter 2, when you interact with Noelle, if you convince her to freeze every single enemy in the game, do some very strange backtracking to Spamson's trash shop, and pick very weird and suggestive dialogue options, Eventually, you will find yourself face to face with Spamton in a trash can, and if you've frozen everybody, he will grant you the Thorn Ring, of which, right here, you have two choices. You can either keep the Thorn Ring on you, or give it to Noelle. It makes one of her most powerful spells that she can cast, Snowgrave, that has a 200% cost, and makes it cost half as much, which allows her to freeze Birdly. If you do this, though, she'll take the Thorn Ring with her, then she'll just leave. Until, in Chapter 4, where it's revealed that Chris actually snuck out during the night, got to Noelle's place, and was able to get the Thorn Ring out of her, and also convinced her that it was all just a dream. Also somehow got Birdly into the hospital at the same time too, but timeline shenanigans are weird. But now, in Chapter 4, we have a choice of proceeding with the weird route, or not. If you proceed too far, you'll make Chris equip the Thorn Ring back onto Noelle, which does... I don't want to talk about it. The point is that Noelle has the Thorn Ring the further you go down into the weird route. My question is, in Chapter 5, will we see Noelle again? I feel there's a solid yes to that, specifically because at the end of Chapter 4, if you've done a full weird route, Carol will actually call Chris, mentioning that Noelle really wants to go on a festival trip with Chris, and not anybody else. And Chapter 5 has been long considered to be the chapter where we go into the festival. Many characters have been referencing it. It's been heavily hinted at that tomorrow, aka Chapter 5, will be taking place in the festival. There's also a lot of different choices as to who you can take to the festival. We don't know at the moment if that'll actually happen, or you'll just always have Susie. But perhaps in Chapter 5, you can have Noelle as a party member instead, and go about the entirety of Chapter 5 with Noelle instead of Susie and Ralsei. So maybe at this time, during Chapter 5, you'll be able to retrieve the Thorn Ring from Noelle, as well as getting that chapter's Shadow Crystal, and hopefully by the end of it all, give the crystals to Sham, get the Pure Crystal, take the Thorn Ring off of Noelle, craft the Twisted Sword, and who knows what else happens after that. So is the entire Weird Route's purpose so that we can get to this point? Not quite? Remember back when I said you had two choices if you could either equip it to Noelle or not? Well, you do have the choice to just keep the Thorn Ring in your inventory. And this, so far, doesn't have any negative ramifications. But you do get to keep the Thorn Ring through every chapter, no matter what happens. So perhaps come Chapter 5, do stuff normal, explore the town, go into the Dark World, secret boss, get the Shadow Crystal, go back to Sham eventually at the very end of the day, and eventually create the Twisted Sword, so we don't have to do the weird route. The point is, we don't have to do the weird route to get the Twisted Sword. So, does that mean anything? For those that have watched my Deltarune stream some many months ago, I titled it The Twisted Route, and then trying to piece together what that actually was, it was a route that didn't exist at the time. Well, I think this is what will be the Twisted Route. Going far enough down the weird route to get the Thorn Ring, but then aborting it, keeping the Thorn Ring with you, going through the rest of the game, eventually getting the Pure Crystal, and you can create the Twisted Sword. At least that's the entire purpose of the Twisted Route. However, something else to consider is that if you were a good little boy or girl, and you went through the entire game from Chapter 1 to Chapter 5 as an example, befriending everybody, recruiting every Darkener possible, making friends with everyone, yada yada, collecting every single Shadow Crystal, you did everything right, and then Sham's like, finally, you've got all the crystals needed to make something incredibly cool. Here, have the Pure Crystal. I just crafted it in 2 seconds. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? Badoop, you've got the Pure Crystal. And then you go over to Malleus, who's like, hey, do you got the Thorn Ring? And you're looking in your inventory and you realized, I don't have the Thorn Ring. Wait, I did everything right. I did everything good. And I didn't get the Twisted Sword? What? To me, personally, I feel like it's a bit of a gut punch, going through all of that effort and then realizing that it didn't matter in the end, specifically for wanting to get the Twisted Sword, where it turns out you actually had to play through the entire game down a weird route, or at the very least go far enough so that you get the Thorn Ring. Which begs the question, could there be something else that this pure crystal is capable of doing? I mean, something as simple as just upgrading one of your weapons could be enough. I've actually heard of a theory out there that that could be what the pure crystal is for. In Chapter 3, Chris gets the black knife, a weapon exclusive to them. Susie gets the justice axe in Chapter 4, weapon exclusive for Susie. So presumably Chapter 5, Ralse will get something exclusive? And then you can use the pure crystal to upgrade one of those. That is how the theory goes. I wish I could find some credits. Here's some credit to whoever this is. Now, do I think that'll personally happen? I mean, there's nothing saying that it won't. It could work out pretty well, although we don't really know what's going to happen in, say, Chapter 6. Like, it's fairly clear that we're going to, at the very least, get 5 shadow crystals, but then we go into Chapter 6, and what? Do we have to use the tools that we accumulated over our various journeys in order to do whatever we can? Well, in the case of the Twisted Sword, we needed to have done a weird route the entire way through, because the plot hole specifically only gives you the shadow crystals and the secret boss items. But you don't really get to use the shadow crystals effectively unless you have the Thorn Ring to make the Twisted Sword, which means most likely that there would probably be some other use for it. In fact, Malleus does mention in Chapter 4, when you converse with them, that he doesn't have any new crafts and needs someone who knows how to bake bread, or whatever he says, implying that finding a master of bread making in Chapter 5 will allow you to create some more stuff. So maybe, just maybe, this is all a build-up into Chapter 6, where everything beforehand was just prep for whatever Chapter 6 is ready to throw at us. And then the 6th chapter will end up having the most difficult fights that we've ever come to face. Maybe we'll fight 20 knights at the same time. Maybe 100 knights at the same time. Who knows? We'll just have to wait until the new chapters come out to find out anything else. Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Oh, one other theory that I do want to discuss before closing out this video as to what I think Chapter 5 could be. I think, potentially, if we wanted to be able to see what the Twisted Sword could do, we could have Chapter 5 be an open world. Which is to say, while the festival is going on, we are able to go to that chapter's dark world, and inside that dark world find the secret boss, and then leave the dark world to go back to the light world while the festival is still going on, and be able to get back to the school where the closet is, go into Castletown, interact with the Sham, get the pure crystal, and we can get the Twisted Sword or whatever else he wants to create for us. Which, to me, I think is pretty interesting, being able to, at least for this chapter, go in and out of a dark world as we please, which could open up a lot of different gameplay opportunities. Now, will it happen? No idea. But at least some evidence towards it being a possibility is that we know Asgore is going to have some involvement in Chapter 5 and is going to have some kind of lore relevance. He is literally in the prophecy, and Gerson refers to Chapter 5 within Lord of the Hammer, which is based off of the prophecy, charred in an inferno of jealousy. That, and Asgore's flower shop has a suspicious double door in the back, which so far every single Dark World has always had double doors, just as kind of a theming thing. And in Chapter 4, while you're venting through Noelle's house, you can find Asgore working on the toilets, and then afterwards going into Carol's room and finding a corkboard of information, where Asgore mentions that he has a black shard. Now, many would say that this could be a shadow crystal, but the only other time black shard is ever used is the black shard that Chris is able to use as a weapon after defeating the knight, entailing that the black shard comes from the knight. Asgore has some connections to the knight. So, theoretically, piecing this all together, Asgore makes a dark fountain in his flower shop. Chris and company is able to enter the flower garden without any issue because Asgore just didn't lock the door or something like that. Every other time in every other Dark World, the Golden Gate out has always been locked, or the fountain has always made it difficult to leave, or we've just never been given an option to go through these doors before. So maybe in Chapter 5, we might finally be able to have a chance and an excuse to have an open world segment, go in and out of the dark and light worlds as we please. Heck, we could even find items in the festival that if we go to the dark world, could transform into usable consumables. or weapons, or even entire new characters. Is this wishful thinking? Probably. I'm just having fun thinking about it. So, that was a really long and in-depth look into Deltarune's plot hole. This video ended up being pretty long, mostly because of the weird tangential evidence that there could be to the plot hole that might have relevance. I just felt like putting them there just because they were relevant. I wanted to make this video specifically to document this small part of Deltarune, because it came to my attention that perhaps not many people actually know about this, because you do need to replay chapters a lot, as well as skip ahead chapters where some people might not want to replay chapters, so they wouldn't even know this existed. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed that, at least some amount. If you've been following me for a while, I've been going through a lot of transitional efforts lately. So this has been a fun video to put together over the last couple weeks, and I'm hoping to actually get it out within a reasonable time. I'm not sure what kind of video project I'll have afterwards, but I'm just happy that I got this done. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed it, at least some amount, and I hope you all have a good night.